The Nobel Peace Prize for 2014 is to be awarded to Kailash Satyarthi for their struggle against suppression of young people and children.
There is no greater violence than to deny the dreams of our children. I refuse to accept that the laws and constitutions are unable to protect our children. Today is the time for every child to have the right to life. I refuse to accept that the shackles of slavery can ever be more stronger than the quest for freedom. I refuse to accept here.
Getting a greeting like this is all the reward Kailash Satyarthi needs for freeing these children from a life of slavery. He tries to give these kids the childhood they missed.
Do you think these kids see you as a Nobel Peace Prize winner?
Oh, I don't think they see me as friend or brother or something like father. I have looked into their frightened and exhausted eyes. I've held their injured bodies and I have felt their broken spirits. I refuse to accept that children belonging to certain sections of society are born to work for others at the cost of their childhood and freedom and education. If the children are exploited, if the children are deprived from their childhood in any part of the world cannot live in peace. The world cannot be human.
It's not often the two winners of the Nobel Peace Prize get together, but it happened yesterday when President Obama met Kailash Satyarthi. They were joined by 3 children who were rescued from child trafficking and forced marriage.
You cannot live in isolation. All the problems and solutions are interconnected. And so the problem of child labor in any part of the world is your problem.
Satyarthi organizes raids with local police, but sometimes employers are tipped off and waiting for him armed.
But I have been attacked many times in my life.
You had a gun to your head?
Literally here.
This is dangerous work, freeing these kids.
Somebody has to pay the cost for freedom. It does not come on plate. So if not me, then who else will do? Nobel Prize.
Who won the Nobel Prize, he asks. Their reply, all of us kids.
It's good. My only aim in life is that every child is free to be a child. Free to grow and develop. Free to eat, sleep, and see daylight. Free to laugh and cry. Free to play and learn. Free to go to school. And above all, free to dream.
हमें शुरुआत करना चाहिए बलात्कारियों घर छोड़ो, बलात्कारियों स्कूल छोड़ो, बलात्कारियों बाजार छोड़ो, मोहल्ले छोड़ो, शहर छोड़ो, बलात्कारियों भारत छोड़ो। बच्चों के साथ बलात्कार करने वालों के लिए इस महान देश में जगह नहीं होनी चाहिए। Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you once again. My dear sisters and brothers, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be with all of you. I knew about Takreem, and then I learned about the new initiative, Tak Minds.
I congratulate all of you who are taking part in this new revolution, the revolution of minds. Because once the constructive minds, the peaceful minds, the purposeful minds come together from all sections of society, may it be culture or art, technology, academia, media, then the revolution is inevitable to come. And different kind of revolution which is needed in the world based on compassion, non-violence, peace, and togetherness. So I hope that this initiative will definitely make this world a better place. I strongly believe that no problem on the earth can be seen or solved in isolation, in silo. If the problems are so interconnected, the solutions are definitely interconnected. And when the like-minded people sit with the objective of finding the solutions, then definitely the change will knock the door and will definitely happen. Dear friends, I know that in coming panel discussions and other sessions you are going to discuss on various issues. But we are beginning with our children. I know that all of you have your own sisters and brothers or children or grandchildren, nephews, nieces, and if not, definitely once upon a time, you were a child. And what has made you to come here? What has enabled you to reach to this situation of accomplishments in your life? Because your childhood was free. Your childhood was safe. And you had opportunity to go to school. I'm sure that each one of you had to have been to school when you were children. But today we are talking about hundreds of millions of children in the world who are not so fortunate. When we were sitting here, 152 million children must be toiling in fields and farms, mines, factories, household works, and other places. Millions of our young boys and girls are sold and bought like animals, and sometimes in lesser price than the animals. 60 million children have never been to school. They had no chance. And another 200 million were forced to leave schooling because either their parents could not afford or their governments have not provided them secure education in primary classes, then they dropped out. So 260 million children have to be in school today, but they are not. But there is additional issue that 50 million children are on move and navigating for a safer place to stay tonight. 50 million. They are victims of conflicts, climate change, global warming, mass-scale displacement or migration, and they are looking for safety, stability in their life. But the fundamental issue is that when we are talking about these millions of children, are they responsible for this situation? Today, when we are sitting here, 75,000 children will die out of those diseases which are curable. Each year, 3 million children die out of hunger, malnutrition. Are they responsible for these situations? No. They are victims and further victimized. They are facing all sort of violence which we can think of. But, dear friends, they are not simply numbers. Every child has a breathing heart. Every child has a soul. Every child has or had mother or father. Someone like me who has been working with children for last 40 years in India and globally, they are not simply data or number for me. They are human beings as you or I. In 1981, when I started my fight against child slavery, first in India and then South Asia and globally, it began with a man named Wazzle Khan who knocked my door for some help. He was a desperate father whose daughter was about to be sold to a brothel. And that time, after giving up my career as electrical engineer, I started publishing a journal which was solely devoted for the cause of children and women who are most marginalized and excluded. So Wazzle Khan came with only hope that I may publish his story. And he started narrating the story. He said 17 years ago, he and his newly married wife, along with few more families, were taken to work at a brick kiln. They were lured away or trafficked. And during all those years, they were not paid anything. They were not allowed to leave the place. All children were born and grew up there, including 15-year-old Sabo. And one day, parents saw that some unknown people from the brothels came to negotiate the price. They were making the deal, but the deal was not materialized somehow. So, father ran away sometimes in the middle of the night in search of some help. He knocked every door and somehow he came to know about me and reached to me. When I was writing his story, I started thinking if Savo was my sister, what would I do? I'm not going to simply sit and write and wait for government response or police response. I would hold the whole world upside down to rescue my sister or my daughter. I told Wazzle, I'm going to rescue your daughter. I'll go with my friends. I collected some friends and some money and reached to that place. I was badly beaten up. Wazzle was caught by those slave masters, and I had to come empty hands. But I strongly believe that there is no problem born on the earth without its solution inside its womb itself. One has to be strategic, one has to be resilient, one has to be courageous to find that solution. Normally when we see the problem, we see, oh, it's so complicated, so dangerous, so risky. No, if the problem is born, then the solution should also be born with it. So I decided to go to some of my friends, lawyers, and with their help, I approached the High Court in Delhi, and within few days, with the help of judiciary, I was able to rescue not only this beautiful daughter, Sabo, and her family, but 36 children, women and men. This is the first documented incident of private initiative or civil society or individuals' initiative to rescue some children and men and women from slavery. And I tell you that when I was taking those people back from the High Court to my small office, all those children who were born and grew up in slavery had no imagination of big buildings or cars or so many people, crowd in Delhi. They were jumping on the streets like if you keep frogs in a basket and suddenly you open the cover and they jump. And mothers of these children were hugging them. They were crying out of joy. That was the moment of truth for me. I could feel the glimpse of God on the faces of those mothers and fathers who never imagined that they will see their free children on the streets jumping like that. Or the smile of freedom appeared on the faces of those children were no less than the glimpse of God. And I never looked back since then. We had freed tens of thousands of children in India. That was my very direct intervention against the violence against children. But then I realized that the violence has many manifestations. Slavery is one of them. Today, let me share you with some of those stories of children. I organized a march for an international law in 1998. Several children who were victims of prostitution, some of them were former child soldiers, child combatants, slaves, they were marching with me. There was a Sudanese boy who was very timid, very shy, rather looking angry on his face. His name was Mohammed. I knew about his story. One evening I sat with him, beside him in the dinner. I started trying to console him. And he said, finally, "Sir, I can see a father, my father in you. But do you know that one day some terrorist groups, some extremist groups taken me away from my home with the blind on my eyes and took to an unknown hideout and gave me a gun and said that now you have to learn how to operate a gun, push the trigger." So he said that I never seen gun or I never hold gun. Then next day, they have just gave some demonstration, and next day they brought me back to my home, again blinded eye. When I saw that I have reached my home early in the morning around 4, 5 o'clock, I was so thrilled. And then they put me in a corner, and I was so happy that eventually they are going to leave me. But then my father, my uncle from one side, and my other family members, my own mother, started walking on the other side for toilets, for latrines, on open ground, because there were no washrooms or latrines in their homes, in their houses. And then two guys who were holding me, he said, they ordered me to push the trigger on my father, my uncle, my mother. And I said, "No, I won't do." Then they said, "Look, we are going to do it. We will kill your parents and then we will kill you." I closed my eyes, Muhammad said, and then No other option. I just pushed trigger. All my family was killed. He asked, tell me what is my fault? What was my fault? He challenged me. And I was listening that this is the name of prophet. Mohammed asked me, what is my fault? And what are you going to do to ensure in the future that it is not repeated with any other child on the earth? I was crying. I was trying to collect all my energy, all my power, all thing from inside. What is the fault of such children? But, dear friends, these children still have dreams. I spent some days in a refugee camp in Germany where a number of Syrian, Afghani, and some other refugees were staying. So my focus was on children, but also I wanted to sensitize some German organizations to care for those people, refugee people, because there were a lot of resistance from some ordinary people against Angela Merkel a few years ago. I was sitting with a group of children and I noticed that about 10, 11-year-old boy was sitting on a wheelchair. He lost his legs and his father in a bomb blast in Syria, in a village in Syria. And he lost his mother on the way somewhere. But even then, when I asked him that you seem very confident, what you wanted to do in the future, because now you are in safe hands in Germany. They are educating you, taking care of you. He said, no, I don't want to stay here longer. I want to go back home. And he says, I wanted to become an engineer so that I can reconstruct my village and my country. I told to Germans that these refugees are not here to grab your jobs. They are not going to occupy your houses forever. This boy's voice is the voice of millions of refugee children in the world. They still have attachment with their families and their villages and their countries. So he had a dream to become an engineer and reconstruct his country. Who is going to fulfill that dreams? And that's why I said that tech mind is a silent revolution to feel the dreams of millions of such people in the world and come out with more comprehensive, more holistic solutions. Not in isolation, but collectively in this region and all across the world. There are many manifestations of violence and many reasons of violence which children are facing. Political reasons, as no one knows better than this region, the MENA region, and some other parts of the world. There are structural and systemic issues. There are socio-cultural issues and reasons. There are economic issues. Many of you might be knowing that shoes you are wearing, clothes you are wearing, chocolates you are eating, sporting goods, footballs and other things you are playing with, or toys you are bringing to your own kids are made by children who could not dream to do. I work across 144 countries. One day, I was with a group of young people who had scars and injuries on their bodies in a remote village in Ivory Coast, Koteva, in West Africa. And I was trying to find solutions to the problem of child labor and child slavery in that area, because these children were involved in producing cocoa beans. And cocoa beans is the core ingredient of chocolate. Chocolate industry is a billions of dollars industry. Most children, most people like chocolate, gift chocolate to each other in several occasions. But when I asked to those children that, how do you like chocolate, my sons, my daughters? They looked at each other and asked, what chocolate is? So I thought that there could be some translation problem. I said, this is candy, this is sweet bar. They said, no, I never heard of chocolate. None of them have seen or tasted chocolate in their life. Is it the world we are creating for our children? We have conquered Mars. We are conquering Pluto. We have been able to take very close-up photos of Pluto and trying to see how we can conquer. We live in the world of technology where high-speed internets are key. We cannot live without that. I was sitting upstairs and I asked Leila, how can I get connected with my Wi-Fi? And she was looking for a password. And I got connected and felt comfortable. Without that, I cannot live myself. Yesterday, I was in Rome. Tomorrow, I will be in Abu Dhabi, which is just next door. But 3 days ago, I was in California. And I look for the fastest possible connections of my flight. We live in the age of speed and digits. But we cannot reach out to millions of our children. I ask, whose child is Mohammed? I ask, whose child is the boy who wanted to become an engineer in refugee camp? I ask, whose daughters are they who are snatched away from their parents in Syria by some extremist forces? And sometimes I read in the newspapers and watched on televisions that they were sold for sex to some of those extremist separatist, those groups, for a price less than the cigarette pack. I've also seen the photos of those girls who could not satisfy their customers, and they were buried alive in pre-prepared graves. The boys given guns in their hands to kill the so-called suspected traitors. If they can't, they were buried alive. Whose sons are they? Whose daughters are they? If we people with constructive minds, if we people who came with some sort of solution orientation here, who wanted to make this world a better place, if they are not our children, if we don't feel that they are our children, who will feel? If you won't help them, who will help? So, dear friends, we have to look for solutions. How we can engage various stakeholders in society? To begin with, governments. Let me also tell you that denial of healthcare, denial of safety, denial of education is also a manifestation of violence. Every child is born free. Every child is born with the divine right to cry, to demand, to express herself or himself in her mother's lap on the very first moment she is born, to learn new things. So learning is a birthright, a divine right. So education, is not only the legal rights, but a divine rights. As I said, that 63 million children have never been to school, and 200 million forced to leave. How can you think of a just world? How can you think of an equitable world? How can you think of a world which is based on social, gender justice? Shared and prosperous world without an education. Education is key. It is a human right which is the key to rest of the human rights. But so many children are denied education. One can say, oh, world is very poor. These countries are poor. These families are poor. No, dear friends. What is needed to ensure basic education for our children? In primary classes, only $22 billion additional expenditure, additional investment, $22 billion. What is this $22 billion? This is 4.5 days of global military expenditure. If the world decides that we are not going to kill each other, we are not going to open fire and tanks and bombs and whatnot to kill humanity, just 4.5 days recession, we can educate all our children in primary. And a week-long global military expenditure can ensure primary and secondary education both. And if you compare this $22 billion, this is 1/5 of what Americans spend on tobacco. 1/5. It's not a big deal. It is not the poverty. This is just an excuse. This is the poverty of humanity. This is the poverty of prioritizing the issues of our children. This is the poverty of compassion. We have to get rid of it. Investment in education. Similarly, we have to engage faith leaders and institutions because they are most powerful. Their outreach, their following is enormous. I was in Rome yesterday, and day before I had a very, very good meeting with Pope Francis. And I brought this issue of, a serious issue of institutional sexual abuse by the priest. Many people will say that this is not only the controversial issue, but very sensitive issue to talk to Pope. But I felt that they are my children. They should be Pope's children as well. We have to put an end to this menace in all institutions of Hinduism and Christianity and Islam or whatever, all religions. But for that, the faith leaders should be courageous enough to say no to it. One of the issues, one of the help I sought from him was for a new convention, what I call the UN Convention to stop online sexual abuse, pornography of children, and child trafficking. There is no international binding, there is no international law on this. Because it has, this whole problem has a global nature. There was a report last year that it has grown as $8 billion industry, child pornography, $8 billion industry. The trafficking in the world has grown as $150 billion industry compared to $22 billion, only $22 billion which are required for education. $8 billion are earned annually as illicit money out of child pornography. Governments can ban websites, but they cannot control the global servers and they cannot control the service providers, data service providers. So there is a need of a law convention and a full mechanism, a full institutional mechanism to support it. There is no global helpline that should also be the part of this UN convention. So I started working on it and gathered support from more than 20 Nobel laureates and moral leaders and number of presidents and prime ministers, and pushing for this idea of an international convention. So that's another challenge, because this is the newest forms of violence against children, the online violence, sexual abuse. Faith institutions and faith leaders can not only help in that, but they can also strongly tell their followers and their devotees that if you are using children in any form and exploiting them as child laborers or child prostitutes or doing any form of child sexual abuse or violence, then you would not be considered as the part of this religion or this faith. They should have courage to tell it. So that is another way of doing it. The countries should have laws, but more importantly, the laws have to be properly enforced to stop violence against children. And that again requires political will. A global political will that can help in putting adequate funding for making laws and enforcing those laws, but also building the capacities and sensitizing the enforcement agencies, including police and inter-border agencies. These measures can put an end to the menace of violence against children. Dear friends, while summing up, I would also tell you that only 20 or less than 20 years ago, number of child laborers in the world was 260 million, according to ILO, in year 1998. We organized this march across 103 countries and participated and joined physically by 15 million people, mostly youngsters, mostly youth and children, and they said no. When we entered in Geneva, in the General Assembly of International Labour Organization of United Nations, we demanded no more tools in tiny hands, no more guns in tiny hands. Children want books, children want toys, children want pencils. And nobody could say no to it. An international law has been enacted, the ILO Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labor. And since then, in 15 to 16 years' time, just in 15 years' time, the number has dropped from 260 million to 150 million. 110 million children was saved in last 15, 16 years. So it is possible. 20 years ago, the number of out-of-school children in primary age group was 130 million. That has dropped to 60 million. So it is possible. Those who believe that these problems are complicated, we cannot solve it, they are wrong. All these problems are solvable. That requires political will, but that requires individuals' will and courage, social will and courage. That requires to prioritize the issues of our children. People keep on saying that children are our future, but in reality, they are our present. If we are not going to save our present, we are not going to save our future. I always say that please, 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 for the sake of heaven, save this generation, one generation. If we are able to protect one generation, then that protected generation, educated generation, healthy generation would be capable enough to protect all generations to come. Then the world would be a different place to live. That would be led by the young people who are educated and properly protected. And that's why I have launched a campaign called 100 million for 100 million. 100 million young people in the world are facing violence. But on the other hand, hundreds of millions of youth, as well as people like you, hundreds of millions, are full with energy and enthusiasm They have purpose sometimes, they have compassion, they have idealism. So the power of youth could be recognized and channelized so that they can become the change makers and champions for the cause of 100 million left out children who are victims of violence. 100 million youth should take the lead. They should become the leaders and heroes for the protection of 100 million other young people. I urge you to encourage your sisters and brothers, your sons and daughters, your friends, students, youth in your country, but you can also be one of those who can raise the voice for 100 million young people who are victims of violence. You can be, you can do. Join the campaign with me. That is called 100 million for 100 million. This is the human history's largest and most ambitious youth campaign. Do you want to be one of them? Yes. Slowly. Yes? Or yes or yes? Then raise your hands. Oh, I did not say that raise your one hand. I said raise your hands. Oh, wow, thank you. Keep on raising hands. Recorder is taking a photo that you are the hero inside, from inside. You are the change makers for those 100 million young people who are the victims of violence in the world. We will save them. Who will save them? You will save them? Yes. Thank you so much. I once again thank you. When I was invited to receive my Nobel Prize and asked to deliver my acceptance speech, you know that this is the second largest viewed episode on television, the Nobel Peace acceptance speech. And you know which is the largest viewed thing on television? FIFA World. Oh, wow. Some people think that it's about the President of United States. No. This is the World Cup, Football World Cup. So that is the largest one, and the Nobel Prize was the second. So when I went on the dais, I lost my papers. And it never happened in their 100 years of history. Everybody was nervous, the king, queen, prince, prime minister, and the whole world was watching live on CNN or BBC, or both, and many local televisions. And then I felt more comfortable because the papers were lost. And I remembered a story. There was a heavy fire broken out in jungle. All animals and birds were rushing for a safer place, including King Lion. And Lion noticed that there was a tiny hummingbird going straight towards flames. And he shouted, "What are you doing, committing suicide?" She said, "No. No, sir, I am going to extinguish this fire because I was born and grew up here." And then he shouted again that, "How come? How can you do it?" The bird answered, "Please look at my beak. I am carrying a drop of water. I am doing my bit," she said. And rest is the history. I told to hundreds of millions of audience that day, this is the philosophy of my life. If there is a fire of violence around us, we cannot sit quiet. I always saw a bird inside me, but now I am here to awaken the same hummingbird inside each one of you. All of you once in a while think that do something good for the society. Take risk. You wanted to take risk, but your mind sometimes says, no, it is risky. No, how are we going to benefit out of it? What is my personal gain out of it? and you stop it. You keep on killing your hummingbird. Today, my dear sisters, my dear brothers, awaken that hummingbird. Make this country, this region, this world a safer and better place for all generations to come. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.